The publication of the Prayer of Jabez arrived on the heels of the Y2K scare. Who knows what I'm talking about when I say Y2K scare? Yes, and some of us say it adamantly because we were there. So this stood for the year 2000, and I had a picture of the Time magazine cover, and it just showed absolute chaos with somebody carrying, I think they're carrying a cross, somebody looking like Jesus. And because this came out in January of 99, we were encouraged towards a full year of panic leading up to this. So if you were in any evangelical church around this time, you were likely hearing that we had given too much authority over to technology, implying that we had wrestled authority away from God, and that human error in assigning a 2-digit computer year instead of a 4-digit computer year had not anticipated the disruption that would be caused by the date change to the year 2000, and that the computers that ran everything were going to crash, and they were going to take down modern civilization with them. So in that year leading up to January 1st, 2000, I knew multiple church families who had full stores, and I'm talking a year's worth of supplies, food, fuel, and of course they had the guns to protect it with in case, any other needy family came wanting provisions to care for the people that they loved. And I wish I was joking, but it was actually a time of deep anxiety for a whole lot of people. There was the fear that life would literally stop in its tracks, that commerce would shut down, that utilities would stop, that food transport would be disrupted, and that there would be widespread mayhem. So in other words, an utter lack of control over our lives, putting us at God's mercy and at only God's mercy. And a lot of this fear was based on the notion of a God who was evaluating not only our every move, but our thoughts and our weaknesses as well. And it was effectively promoted by Christian individuals and organizations who were themselves either scared enough or manipulative enough to find value in controlling beliefs and perceptions and behavior. And just in case you think I'm unfairly putting the blame for this panic on Christians, it's not an unfair designation. Even that Time magazine cover really made this a religious issue, but of course, the Christians did not see it that way. The one good thing that came from this is it reminded us that God was not out to get us. Clearly, God had ample opportunity to rain down wrath and judgment and pass that up. And then along comes this kind of marginal prosperity message of the Prayer of Jabez, and people were ripe for the picking. We were desperate for a message that God wanted to bless us, especially in spite of our adverse circumstances. And I say we intentionally because I was pregnant for most of 1999 with a due date of January 1st, 2000. So I don't know if you've ever read 1 Chronicles, but the first 9 chapters, with the exception of a very few character descriptions, is entirely made up of genealogies. And just to give you an example, I am going to read you the opening of 1 Chronicles chapter 4. This says, the descendants of Judah, Perez, Hezron, Carmi, Hur, and Shobal. Reiah, son of Shobal, was the father of Jahath, and Jahath the father of Ahumiah and Lahad. These were the clans of the Zorathites. These were the sons of Edom, Jezreel, Ishma, and Idbash. Their sister was named Hazelelponi, which my daughter said she's going to name her child. Penuel was the father of Gedor, and Ezer the father of Hushah. These were the descendants of Hur, the firstborn of Pratheth, the father of Bethlehem. Asher, the father of Tekoa, had 2 wives, Helah and Nara. Nara bore him Ahujah, Hefer, Temeni, Hajashtari. These were the descendants of Nara. The sons of Helah, Zereth, Zohar, Ethnan, and Kaz, who was the father of Anob and Hazarubibah, and the clans of Aharel, son of Haram. So seriously, 9 chapters of this, pretty much nonstop. And then, out of nowhere, is 1 Chronicles 4, 9, and 10. And this says, there was a man named Jabez who was more honorable than any of his brothers. His mother named him Jabez because his birth had been so painful. He was the one who prayed to the God of Israel, "Oh, that you would bless me and expand my territory. Please be with me in all I do and keep me from all trouble and pain." And God granted his request. So I want to clarify before we get into this that for all the manipulation of the idea of the prayer of Jabez, and let me tell you, as I was researching this, every single YouTube clip that came up was a prosperity teaching. But the book that fueled the mania, the author actually presented a pretty sound case, both spiritually and theologically. And I don't remember what it was that put this passage on my radar, but you guys do know that our pastoral team spends a lot of time praying that everything presented from this pulpit represents the message that God has for us, for every person sitting here in this time and space, and then for whoever hears the podcast. So as I was preparing for this message, I went looking for my own copy of the book, couldn't find it, figured I gave it away to somebody who needed it. But Tuesday night, I came into my office to work on the sermon, and there on the conference room table with a few other books that it looked like somebody had just dumped off was a copy of the prayer of Jabez. I could not believe it. So if it's yours, I have it. So to get into our key passage, and this is really, again, this is a message I believe that God has for us right where we are at. The first thing we read in verse 9 is that Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. So that word honorable actually translates as weighty or burdensome, meaning we should understand Jabez as having more substance or integrity than his brothers. And our initial response to that might be, how can having integrity translate from weighty or burdensome? And the answer is the Bible doesn't spend so much time reminding us of the importance of being honest and generous and forgiving and available and accessible to others and self-sacrificing, because those are easy things. Living with integrity can be really burdensome, but it's also the only way we fulfill the command to love God above all else and others as a close second. And while it might not always be the easiest way to indulge ourselves, it is the only way to have genuine peace. But I want to dig a little bit deeper into that translation of equating being honorable with being weighty or burdensome. So how many of us have been around people where we're like, seriously, or such a downer, lighten up? And sometimes we have a valid point, and there are people who are just generally pessimistic, and they have a harder time finding joy and beauty in the things around them. But there are others who have a really difficult time ignoring the pain of others. So for Lent, I have, for the most part, given up watching movies and TV series because I was doing way too much binging. I will seriously carry my laptop with me from room to room as I'm doing tasks, just so it keeps me with it. It's kind of that like white noise factor. So it's been a really healthy thing for me to do this, but I have an elliptical at home that I occasionally use, and my dilemma right now is finding things that I can watch to kind of, distract me and make the time go faster. It's a really important thing. So I'm pretty much limited to YouTube clips of the news and maybe like Ellen or John Oliver occasionally. But the other day, because it's one of my kids' favorites, there were a whole bunch of Good Mythical Mornings in the feed. So if you have not seen it, check it out. It's basically these two kind of goofy and entertaining guys who review everything from food to toys to trends to whatever. It's okay. It's pretty comical. I chose an episode that was ranking junky cereal because I figured if I'm not going to eat it myself, I may as well live vicariously. And I was really enjoying this episode, and it was making the time go faster. And I didn't have a whole lot of guilt about watching something on TV, at which point one of the guys tasting the cereal loved it so much that he said something like, "What a great country." and I was suddenly moved from being mindlessly entertained to a state of genuine sorrow, because all I could think of were the thousands of poor kids that also watch this dumb show, and make no mistake, they do, and how they're happy when there's just Wonder Bread and government cheese and peanut butter in the house, and they never get cereal like that. And what a downer, right? Just hearing that feels emotionally burdensome. It's like, really, you can't even just enjoy the show? And I want to be careful in stating that I'm not comparing my empathy to the honor of Jabez, because just so you know, I stayed on the elliptical and I finished the episode. But I imagine that Jabez was really motivated by his virtue. I imagine that when all of his brothers wanted to leave work early, he was the one going, yeah, but the animals are out in the field still and they need to eat, and I don't know how good I feel about going out partying when there are people in need all around me. And that said, being honorable does not look the same for all of us. We know that we're supposed to consider and even give precedence to the needs of others, and being compassionate and ethical always does require extra effort. We do that differently, but we do need to do it. So next we see that Jabez is actually named for the pain that he caused his mother during childbirth. His name literally means he causes pain. So undoubtedly, this facilitated an empathy that inspired his integrity and his compassion, because while it wasn't uncommon to give children what to us are oddly descriptive names in this culture at this time, it's pretty safe to bet that it would be kind of excruciating to be indelibly attached to the agony suffered by someone else for which you had no genuine responsibility. It wouldn't be unusual for something like this to produce significant depression or even resentment. Although it could have been kind of like a badass name if they named him like Womb Ripper or something, but I don't think it was like that. I think it was actually, a burdensome thing. So regardless, Jabez understands the pain attached to his name. He's almost surely suffered because of it, and he desires to step away from that in all respects. More importantly, he does not allow this conspicuous aspect of his existence to define him. Jumping ahead a little bit in the passage, Jabez requests that God keep him free from trouble and pain. Does not just mean he wants God to protect him from pain. He's also asking God to protect him from causing pain. The Hebrew word for pain translates as evil, misery, distress, and injury. And you absolutely cannot be free from evil, misery, distress, and injury if you are responsible for causing grief to others. So, because we are human and we have messy human experiences, I think it's really important to qualify stuff like this. If you, for example, have left an unhealthy relationship and the person you have separated from is trying to guilt you for abandoning them, that is not what we are talking about in causing grief to others. What I'm talking about here is overtly causing distress to somebody else, or knowing you can do good and choosing not to because you're prioritizing your own comfort or convenience. And this brings us to everybody's favorite part in the passage, where Jabez asks God to bless him mightily and to give him an enlarged territory. So there's no doubt that Jabez's request for an expanded territory, and in some versions it says enlarged border, is, at least on the surface, undeniably a request for more land. But because the passage gives us some good insight to the state of Jabez's heart, we can also be confident that he was looking for greater influence to facilitate good. And here's where we come to what I think might be the most important part of Jabez's prayer and the greatest indicator of the state of his heart. He asks God to please be with me in all that I do, knowing that that is the very thing that will keep him from trouble and pain. Isaiah 26, 7 and 8 says, "The path of the righteous is level, You, the upright one, make the way of the righteous smooth. Yes, Lord, walking in the way of your laws, we wait for you. Your name and renown are the desire of our hearts. So I have to say that in the time since we launched our capital campaign, I have continually seen evidence of this attitude, from the testimonies that were given in the video that Hansa and Danny put together, to the understanding of our legacy as a Christ-centered, inclusive, social justice-oriented church, and the willingness of such a huge percentage of our congregation to step up and not just be involved in this, but truly invest their time and talent and resources into making this a success. But one of the things that's been the most impacting is the innovative way in which people are actually praying about and looking to contribute. We saw this with Andrea setting up the beauty counter table in Sacred Ground. She's not here this week, but she will be back next week, and she's giving 25% of her sales to the capital campaign. So check that out when she's here next week. We see it where people take the time to do our Roots classes and our Discover classes so they can become more invested in the service and the leadership at Mission Gathering. But one of the most touching things I've seen was at our Firm Foundation dinner, and someone came up to me and said, I obviously don't have extra money that I can give. As far as financial resources, there's not a lot I can do, but I am committed to stepping up my contribution of time and service. This was something that they had prayed about and were intentional about. This was so touching to me. And then in thinking about it, I began to realize that's what so many of us do here on a continual basis. It's what makes us so unique, and why when people walk into this place, whether they've been here 100 times or they're brand new, they feel welcomed home. Right? So the point here is that it doesn't matter what our resources or our territory looks like. It's what we do with our resources and with the influence that we have. One of Augustine's many famous sayings is, God is not what you imagine or what you think you understand. If you understand, you have failed. Or as my current favorite professor puts it, if you have understood, what you have understood is not God. Having preconceived notions about who God is, how God works, what's an acceptable sacrifice, and possibly most detrimental, where God can't possibly be in the mix, honestly just gets everybody into trouble. In fact, a lot of us here have received and even been sidelined by that damaging message that God couldn't possibly be at work in our lives or use us to do the work of God because we're not the right gender, we're not the right orientation or the correct political party, or we're too young or too old or too immoral, or we don't have enough money and therefore either can't contribute, or we're being punished because God's not blessing us, or we have too much money and that means we're not spiritual. And I could go on, but the truth is, if you are anywhere that you can hear these words, or you can pick up a Bible, or you have someone encouraging you towards good, and you want to find the peace and the joy and the satisfaction that come with asking God not only to bless you with the resources to make a difference, but to guide you in every step of how you respond to that blessing, then God is already at work in your life and God is already using you. So how do we best steward our resources, both as a community and individuals? This week, Pastor Brandon posted a picture, and you probably saw the same thing if you came in the front, of the new signage of our church. And it says Mission Gathering Christian Church in the front. And then it says the Irenic All Ages Music Venue, and it looks awesome. And I'm going to admit that when I first saw it, I wasn't sure how I felt about having the Irenic advertised in huge letters on the front of our church, because Mission Gathering is a church. And it took me about 7 seconds to remember what kind of opportunity it gives us to house the Irenic and to advertise that on the front of our building. The Irenic is one of the most profound examples of expanded territory that I can think of. Because of this blessing, we have an endless parade of all different genres of music and entertainment in and out of here multiple times a week. And we have the opportunity to connect with people that most churches never have access to. And because the Irenic is housed here in a church, many of the people who come here for a show are curious about Mission Gathering, and they research what kind of church is okay with opening themselves up to secular bands and their followers. So again, territory looks very different for each of us, because a lot of our examples as Christians come from a very public source, from the Bible. We can get caught up in thinking that we are without influence or impact if our own personal ministry is not happening on some type of a grand or at least a public scale. We think if it's menial or not glamorous, then it's not as important as the ministry Jabez probably did with his big piece of land, or a million other examples. But so often, the things we do that go unnoticed at the time, interactions that seem insignificant, or situations that we're not even aware that people are paying attention, these are where God is making the biggest difference, using us to do that. So, does anybody here know what a clergy stole represents? Yeah, me too, because I'm embarrassed to admit, I just found this out last week. I had never even really thought about it before, and probably because I'm not a huge fan of clerical garments, but this was kind of a game changer for me. While it definitely is intended to indicate occupation, the reason it represents pastoral ministry is that it's a reminder of the towel that Jesus used to clean the feet of his disciples. And while I don't ever feel motivated to wear vestments for the purpose of letting people know I'm a pastor, the idea of that reminder of accountability of why I'm supposed to be doing what I do feels pretty relevant. John 13:12-17, and this is from the Message, says, "Then he said, 'Do you understand what I have done to you? You address me as teacher and master, and rightly so. That is what I am. So if I, the master and teacher, washed your feet, you must now wash each other's feet. I've laid down a pattern for you. What I've done, you do. I'm only pointing out the obvious. A servant is not ranked above his master. An employee doesn't give orders to the employer. If you understand what I'm telling you, act like it and live a blessed life.'" So that example of the God of the universe in human form washing the dirty, crusty feet of his disciples and instructing them to do the same types of things for those around them is the space that we are supposed to occupy as followers of Jesus Christ. So I want to give one more example of someone who utilized the territory she was given to a truly astounding and selfless degree. I have Gary's permission to share this story, and it is a witness that has impacted my whole concept of what it means to live as a genuine Christian. So as many of you know, Gary is a retired pastor. He grew up in an extremely fundamentalist context. And when he was coming of age, there was no talk of sexual orientation, and it really wasn't even on his radar. And when he met his wife-to-be, Joyce, he knew she was a lovely woman, and he knew that this is who he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. And it wasn't until after they were married that they began to realize that they weren't entirely compatible, and that Gary then had to begin confronting issues of his own sexuality. So Gary has made this testimony a significant part of his witness, and he's the first to admit that he was not always adequate or present as a partner and parent while he was grappling with what it meant to be gay in a heterosexual marriage in a time and an environment that was entirely resistant to who he was and to the personal context of his ministry and his location. But no matter what was going on, Joyce loved Gary. She supported him, and she knew that every one of their children knew him as the wonderful man that all of us know today. By the 90s, she had proven herself to be, in spite of everything that they had gone through, such an amazing wife and friend that they rededicated themselves to their marriage and began ministering together to the gay community. Not to turn them from their wicked ways, but to affirm them as God's beloved creation, just as they were. I know I've provided an overview, but I think it's so important that we think about how selfless and loving and wonderful Joyce must have been to not only stay with a husband who had been unfaithful, but to trust God enough to end up doing some of her own most significant ministry in the very community that had been a rival for her marriage and her emotional stability. And it's every bit a part of how God has equipped Gary to be the incredible minister that he is today, with one of the most impacting ministries that I have personally witnessed. That is honoring God with the territory he's given you. So, Gary, I love you so much. Thank you for letting me share that. I want to say also, that's a difficult story. As a feminist, I want to go back in time and tell Joyce GTFO, which my daughter said I should not say, but get the frick out. I don't know where you people were going. Anyway, as a pastor who knows the incredible things that happen when we put others before ourselves, I have a lot of sorrow that I never got to meet Joyce before she died of cancer in the year 2000. I was reading a commentary on Jabez, and the author said, "The prayer of Jabez is not a mindless mantra that God always answers, chanted for self-advancement. Instead, it teaches us to seek God faithfully. When God alone is magnified, we will be truly blessed indeed." So hear that. The way we know God is answering our prayers for blessing is when God is glorified and we are a blessing to those around us. And though it doesn't always look the way that we expect it to or that we want it to, God answers our prayers for this type of blessing, just as he did with Jabez. There are a couple of people in heaven that I really look forward to connecting with. I want to hang out with King David because I think we have a lot of similarities. I really look forward to seeing my grandmothers again. But the person I most look forward to meeting for the first time, obviously with the exception of Jesus, is Joyce. I can't wait to meet her. This is something I think of often. Heaven's going to be really cool. But getting to meet Joyce is one of the things I'm very excited about. Amen. I don't know if you heard that. Gary said Mission Gathering is the church that they were praying for before Mission Gathering was on their radar. So we've been doing this series on how we should manage everything God has given us because of our capital campaign. So getting back to who we are as a church community and why it is so worth taking the time to continue praying about how God would have each of us give. I think it's important for us to understand that we as a church community have never expanded our territory so we can have more money. We are seeking greater resources because of the amazing things that God is already doing through our expanded territory. And because when we are faithful with what we already have, God will do even greater things in and through us. Wherever God takes each of us in this capital campaign journey, it is never meant to be stressful. When you are praying about how much to give, wherever God lands you, you will know it's God because you will have a sense of total peace. So this is a good time to move into our 3 minutes of silence, where we divest ourselves from the issues of our week, of our concerns and distractions, and just allow space for the filling of the Holy Spirit. And I'm actually going to ask Terry if you could, on your phone, just set a 3-minute timer since we don't have one. So I'm going to ask you to put both feet on the ground. Center yourselves. Move your phone away from you so you can't feel it vibrating. And then breathe in. And exhale. Breathe in. And exhale. And meditate.